everyone, and welcome to another Avalara webinar. My name is Courtney Drake, and we are very glad to have you joining us today. As you all know, here at Avalara, we are committed to providing you with valuable information that you need to know about tax compliance and ways that you can simplify it within your business. Today's topic is no exception to that. Before we dive into the meat of the presentation, though, I wanted to review a few friendly housekeeping reminders. So first off, we are recording today's presentation. So if you'd like to listen to it again or even share it with a colleague, you will receive a link to the recording within the next 24 hours. Next off, I wanted to review the webinar console that we're all looking at. So all of the windows that you see there can be completely customized. Feel free to move them around or resize those windows to your liking. And then speaking of windows, a few that I wanted to call out. First off, over on the left-hand side of the console, there is a Q&A box. You can use that box to submit your questions at any point during today's presentation. We will be responding to questions individually as we're able to throughout the presentation. And then we do have some time set aside for live Q&A with our speakers as well. I do have to remind everyone that we are not tax advisors, so any answers that we do provide will be on the more general side of things. So just keep that in mind as you're submitting questions. We also have some related resources and links available on the console. So if you're interested in learning more about the topics that we're discussing today, be sure to check those out. That's also where you can download your own copy of today's slides if you'd like to save them for later or just use them to follow along today. And that is all I have for you today. Again, thank you for being here, and I'm going to pass it over to our speaker today.
Thanks, Courtney. Welcome, everyone, to the Reuters Avalara, the state of global cross-border e-commerce. We have a full agenda for you today. Some very exciting key trends and new content based upon the Reuters survey and industry report that we conducted. So very excited to be here. We have a full agenda. So we're going to walk through some highlights from that Reuters report, some key trends going on in the market today, the challenges, and we've broken that out into different geographies. So we'll walk through the regional challenges amongst the different areas that you're interested in selling to. We'll also go through the ways to win in the cross-border market. So key trends on where merchants are winning and how they are winning. And then some solutions that can help you automate some of the nuances of the cross-border environment. So let's jump in and meet the speakers. Let me introduce myself. I am Evan Wright from Avalara. I am the Senior Director of Growth for our cross-border product. I have been at Avalara for over 8 years and in the logistics e-commerce space for well over a decade. I am joined by Nicole. Nicole, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself and say hi?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Evan. So I'm Nicole Morton. I'm a cross-border solutions manager here at Avalara. I spent 10 years working within the logistics space for the likes of DHL and Aramex. So covered all of cross-border and e-commerce. And I've been at Avalara now for 2.5 years, focusing specifically on our cross-border solutions. So it's great to be here today. Paddy, unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, is unable to make it. So you're stuck with Evan and I, but hopefully you find today useful. So thanks, Evan.
Thanks, Nicole. Before we get into the meat of the presentation, let me first tell you a little bit about Avalara and who we are. Avalara is a software company that has been around since 2004. We focus on indirect tax compliance and compliance challenges all around the world. We have 16 offices globally. We have more than 4,800 employees servicing over 30,000 customers in 90 different countries around the world. We are the industry leader in indirect tax compliance and focus specifically on complex compliance challenges for businesses all around the world. Our businesses that we service are across many different industries. As I mentioned, we have 30,000 customers around the world in retail and e-commerce, We have marketplace clients such as eBay and Poshmark. We service lodging and hospitality clients like Expedia and Airbnb and a handful of others, to all sorts of different compliance challenges in manufacturing, BevAlc, and software. We are expanding all around the world. Regardless of industry, we solve those complex compliance challenges. So as mentioned earlier, unfortunately, Paddy will not join us today from Reuters, but we want to give a shout out to Reuters and the content that they put together in collaboration with Avalara. Reuters has done a great job at delivering high-end conferences and content for us. They are a great partner and really curate good in-depth global research. So the content that we will talk about today came from a Reuters survey with 465 respondents and identified numerous key trends throughout the industry. So really excited to present today. And thanks again to our partners, Reuters and Reuters Events.
Great. Thank you, Evan. So I'm going to start now by looking at some of the key trends that went through in the cross-border State of E-commerce report. So if we move on to the slide on international e-commerce, a growth market. So these are just some of the sort of high-level stats that were taken out of the report. The report has a lot of great, juicy information in, but just some key things to point out. In terms of global retail e-commerce market, the sales for 2023 is at 6.15 trillion. A credible number there. I've been speaking about e-commerce for a couple of years now, and it's amazing to see how quickly this number has grown. 64% of respondents sell or ship internationally, or at least plan to. Again, a number that has consistently grown throughout the years. 77% of respondents expect growth in the next 12 to 24 months, and 28% of 2023 sales are cross-border. So that number is still, lower than some of the others. However, again, it has consistently grown year on year. So it's if you're not in that space at the moment, it's a great space to look at going into. The last sort of stat for this is that 1 trillion for 2023 is cross-border e-commerce transactions. So if we're looking at the global retail e-commerce market and then looking at just the value of cross-border, there's a big opportunity for sellers to go into. So going a bit more into detail here on the international e-commerce, so what are some of the things really to look at? Two big stats that we drew out of the report is that 91% of parcel shippers will continue to pass on those costs. And 94% of respondents experience delays in customs. That is a really big number if you're looking at, how many people are purchasing cross-border. So I think a lot of it is, and I'll talk about that in a bit, is really, what are causing, some of those issues when it comes to customs delays, and how as a business can you support that? Some key sort of points that I pulled out of the report is looking at compliance and the cost of it, duty classifications and tax requirements, added supply chain and delivery costs. Again, that delay in customs, that's come up a few times. But ultimately, I think it's looking at all of these sort of points. How does that actually affect customer experience? Because if customers are having a poor experience, the chances of them coming back it lessens. So now let's look a bit at, those challenges of selling internationally. And I'm going to specifically focus on the EMEA region. So to start on the EMEA region, I've got a regional snapshot here of Asia specific. A big market for many, maybe not the top market for most, but still a growing market. So 61% of respondents in the report find the environment for cross-border trade difficult to operate in for Asia. This might not surprise some of you. If we have to look at some of the key stats that we can pull out of Asia, the highest being 47% found that one of the biggest challenges was added supply chain costs. I think that's something that we're going to see a lot. Things have gone up in cost around the world, so it's not just region specific. A very big number on customs regulatory compliance, HS codes as an example. So that's 43% for Asia, which is very high. 37% for added costs of tariffs and duties. 31% for meeting delivery window expectations, which I suppose makes sense if you think of where you might be shipping those products from and then getting Asia, being a big region. Language and cultural barriers, almost 30%, and then the cost of returns, 21%. So there's some very high numbers here. I'm sure they don't, surprise many of you. If we look into some of the detail of it, I think, almost half of the respondents admitted to experiencing, customs delays in those areas. And I think a big part of that is the difficulty in navigating those complex free trade agreements. Asia, compromises many different countries with very many different rules, duty thresholds, etc. So, really getting on top of those trade agreements can be quite complex. It is quite a fragmented trade environment, as I just mentioned, sort of the size, the scale of it. There's complex documentation requirements. It's not as simple as, shipping around Europe. That's 27 countries, that have a very similar process. Securing reliable and cost-effective freight is a major challenge. And as you can imagine, the cost of transport increases the further afield you go. So these are just some of, the key points really for Asia, and I'm sure they don't surprise any of you. Doesn't mean there isn't a big opportunity there. So it's just really understanding how you can overcome some of those big challenges. So now let's look a little bit on Middle East and North Africa. Again, probably not as big a market for many, but it is, a continent in itself to tap into, and it would be a pity to turn, Africa and Middle East off. So looking at the report, 57% of respondents in the Middle East also find that environment for cross-border trade difficult. So a little bit less than Asia, but still quite a high number in itself. If we look at some of the specific challenges for the Middle East and North Africa, the biggest one again being the added supply chain costs, but this is much higher at 53% than it was for Asia. Customs regulatory compliance, again, quite high at 30%. However, the added costs of tariffs and duties is even higher at 36%. Meeting delivery time windows is surprisingly quite low at 16%. Language and cultural high again, one that you can understand with the various cultures across those areas at 33%. So again, these are some figures, a little bit different to the Asia ones. Some are higher, some are surprisingly lower. I'm sure they don't surprise any of you, being a South African myself and coming from the continent of Africa. It's quite complex to really overcome the different cross-border rules. So I think looking at that report again, it's quite expensive to actually secure cost-effective freight, but I think also reliable is a big thing that comes out. There's only very few carriers that have high success into that area. So again, my recommendation if you're going into that part of the world is to really do your research in terms of who has the market share there and who is known to be reliable. 2/3 experience frequent delays in customs. Again, not surprising with the various customs authorities across that region. But it's important that if you are aware, and the fact that 2/3 experience that, it's about communication to you and customers, right? That is what's going to improve the customer experience. So I don't think there's anything too surprising there, but interesting stats. So now we're going to move on to the regional snapshot of Europe. I'm sure many of you are a lot more familiar. This is a region or territory that, definitely most of the customers that I deal with or speak to sell quite frequently into Europe. So let's look at some of the numbers. 55%, which is still a very high number if you looked at Asia and Africa and the Middle East, find this environment difficult for cross-border trade. And I think the biggest thing, which I hate to even use the B word because it gets mentioned all the bloody time, but Brexit, there's still obviously going to be the ramifications of that, and many businesses still trying to wrap their heads around that. So again, if we look at some of the individual stats that came out, it's probably not surprising. Good that actually added supply chain cost is not the highest, where it was the highest for the other two regions that we looked at. But the highest is customs regulatory compliance. And again, not surprising, since many sold into that area without the need for paperwork, without the need for HS codes, and that has obviously recently come into play. So that number's at 41%. And again, not surprising, the 38% of shipments are delayed in customs. This would definitely be because of the changes, and many people that I've definitely spoken to purely sold into Europe and didn't obviously have to deal with any customs paperwork. So again, wrapping their heads around that. So not really surprising there in terms of, the stats. I think just some key things to sort of mention out here, and I did speak about it a bit earlier in key trends, but 91% of logistics service providers are passing those costs on to their customers. So any increases they've had in supply chain from carriers, they passing on. 25% claim the cost pass throughs will be significant. So again, I think there was COVID surcharges, Brexit surcharges that came into play in the last couple of years that are being passed on. So, making the added supply chain costs quite a lot higher. Another, sort of stat to mention here is that 72% of European retailers find returns a burden. Again, remembering that if you're not clear to your end customer, that there's going to be duties and taxes, the likelihood of that shipment being rejected and returned is a lot higher. So I think the key thing to play on there would be, the customer experience and being clear on the process, the time it's going to take for their shipment to be delivered, and any additional costs. So that was really covering off the various regions in EMEA. Some of it might have been surprising to some, others I'm sure you would have been experiencing some of that yourselves. So now we're going to look at, the overall, what are those challenges? And, the next thing is really, how can we support you, or how can you overcome them? So when we look at the overall report as a whole rather than by region, you can see that by far the highest number is shipments being delayed in customs, very closely followed by customs regulatory compliance. Again, very closely followed by supply chain costs. So those three are, you could almost say joint tie for the highest and the biggest challenges that customers are experiencing. Okay, so looking at those three of the highest, or the biggest challenges, let's break it down a little bit more. So it's really looking at how we can navigate all of that complexity and why it's so painful. So looking at this, again, it's the real-time calculations of customs duties and import taxes. By having a solution in place that allows you to do that, that will really overcome a lot of those sort of issues at the top. Added supply chain costs, yes, but it's about being specific, knowing exactly what those charges are. The ability to be able to maintain the thousands of different product-specific rates across all the different countries can be quite challenging. So finding a solution that automates as much of this as possible, because if there's one thing you don't want to get stuck in, it's compliance or having any liabilities in that area. Again, trying to manage trade restrictions for imports and exports can be a nightmare. So really trying to navigate all of these complexities will be difficult to do alone and daunting, which is why those that do try and do it alone don't tend to sell in as many areas of the world than those that have managed to automate this process. So we've discussed really how you can navigate this, and I think this is a really important slide that we're on now in terms of de minimis rules and the thresholds. And the reason why we've brought this up is it's all good and well trying to navigate. We saw that compliance duties and taxes being one of the highest challenges. And this is exactly why. Because not only does each country have a threshold for duties, but their tax threshold is generally very different. So pulling back to that report, almost 27% of the challenges encountered were around, the ability to accurately calculate duties and taxes. So just looking at this as an example here, we have Canada, which has 150 Canadian dollar duty threshold. However, their tax threshold is 40. Europe, so I've got France, but this would cover, most of Europe. In the duty threshold is 150 euros, even though recently in the last 2 years, the import tax threshold was waived and is now zero. Similar for the UK, but it's at £135. The US, which is a massive market for many to sell into, but I'll let Evan touch on that in a bit. The duty threshold is high at $800. However, each state has its own tax thresholds and tax requirements, which is an absolute nightmare. So I know it's showing a zero in this table, but there's a whole different set of thresholds and rules when looking at the US. So the point of this is we can see why it's so challenging and why it would be almost impossible for you as a business to try and maintain the different duty and tax thresholds when they're different for each and every country. So when we looked at, and one of the biggest reasons, when it said, customs delays, and going back to that report, almost 43% encountered challenges with customs delays. So it's breaking it down to look at, I've had customers come to me often and say, we've got customs delays and we're trying to figure out what the issues are. It's really going back to basics and looking at, for example, HS codes, a harmonized system code, which, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, so it's not new to you, but every product in the world is assigned its own universal HS code. The first 6 digits are related to that product, and as I said, universal. However, what many businesses don't know is that every single country, the next 3 to 6 digits are country specific. And it's through the HS code that countries control what is coming in and out of their country, but by doing that, they apply different duty rates. So as you can see for the example of this product, to Australia, US, and Japan, even though it's the exact same product, there are different duty percentages applied. So in order to really try and overcome the issue of customs delays, one of the first things I would say to you as a business is look at your HS codes as starting points. Ensuring that you've got the right HS codes will help a smooth transition through customs, but it'll also make sure that you and your customer are paying the right duties. I had a customer recently where, their product is actually made of sustainable materials, and actually their customers were paying an extra 7% duty than they needed to, just by them having the HS code incorrectly classified. So the last thing to look at here is really on one of the biggest stats that I pulled out on the report was that 96% of people are put off buying from overseas if the whole price isn't evident. I don't even need to touch on this in too much detail because I'm sure we're all online shoppers in our own right. And there's nothing worse than getting a slip through the door to say, sorry, we can only deliver your parcel once you pay the duties that are owed. So it goes without saying that customers want transparency, and in order for you to give them that transparency, shipping and offering them a delivered duties paid solution is the way forward. And this then allows your customer to see exactly what they need to pay at the point of checkout. It will help improving the customs delays because those duties and taxes are paid upfront. So this ultimately would be one of the key things that I would say to really help improving a lot of those stats that we looked at in terms of customer experience, delays, etc., is looking at shipping DDP. Perfect. So I think you've all probably heard enough of my voice. So now I'm going to hand over to Evan, who's going to talk through the challenges of selling internationally, but specifically for North America. So thank you. Evan, over to you.
Thanks, Nicole. Now we're going to talk about challenges of selling internationally in North America. So we're going to go into the in-depth detail on what's going on in North America in regards to cross-border. In North America, we have one of the most complex markets when it comes to compliance. We have regulatory requirements at the state and local level that are increasingly challenging for businesses to maneuver around. And so as you can see here on the screen, regulatory compliance rates the highest challenge when selling into North America. And I believe that is because of our state and local laws and how they change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. When you're selling into North America from EMEA or APAC or other countries around the world, we have a very high de minimis. So Nicole walked through the de minimis and how it's different from taxes to duties. Here in North America, we have an incredibly high de minimis value for duties. That threshold is around 800 US dollars, and therefore it requires a very large ticket item in order for duties to be calculated. So what we see from an e-commerce perspective is that about 8 of 10 purchases fall under that de minimis value. Of all regions, North America, because of the fact we have so many businesses and it is such a large market, we have the lowest volume of cross-border sales from US or Canadian businesses selling internationally, around 25% compared to 34% in LATAM. Almost 50% of those US retailers are ignoring that international traffic. So there is a market and high demand for US goods, especially in different high luxury brands. But we're not seeing those brands take advantage of that international traffic. That is upticking. We are seeing a lot more brands, especially Avalara customers, talk about that international growth and that trajectory. Within the next 24 months, they believe they want to start focusing on it. And we're seeing that because of the plateau in e-commerce and the regulatory and macro environment changing. They're seeing more and more customers come to us requesting information on how to tackle the cross-border challenges. But historically, we are seeing not a ton of customers in the US specifically look to sell outside of US. And when they do, it's typically to English-speaking countries. So 42% of the respondents for the survey found it difficult to operate in that cross-border environment. So we're seeing really it's the regulatory and customs compliance and those state and local issues as the biggest drivers for not expanding internationally in North America. And I'm going to walk through why. So getting into the nuances of why regulatory compliance is so difficult, Nicole touched on HS codes. I want to double click on that and really emphasize how difficult the regulatory compliance can be when trying to sell cross-border. So HS codes, as Nicole mentioned, are different from country to country. But as we look at even just selling from in North America, from US to Canada, which technically is a cross-border sale, a US entity would have to classify their goods to a Canadian harmonization code. And as they walk through it, I have a good example here on the screen of a slipper. So this is a loafer or a slipper, and the universal HS code is that 6 digits, as Nicole mentioned, and then you have to find that country-specific code, which is typically 10, depending on the country, 10 digits, could be 12. And it will differ not only on the type of materials that are used, but also the use case of that product. So in this example, this loafer could be classified for medical or ballet reasons. It could be classified as a female, or it could be classified as slippers. And you can see how the varying duty rates amongst those different use cases. So back to the Reuters example, there's 94% of businesses that we interviewed, that Reuters conducted that survey, said they encountered delays as a result of classification or incorrect documentation. And as you can see from my use case here, how difficult just classifying your products can be. And it can be a burden for companies to jump into the cross-border space. And as we've seen from this survey and this report, that regulatory and trade compliance rules are the number one driver for not entering into the cross-border market. And as Nicole and I have mentioned, this is a trillion-dollar market that we're talking about. So there's a lot of opportunity for growth, and there's ways to help maneuver around that. And one of those ways to maneuver around that is selling on marketplaces. Marketplaces are really capitalizing on the cross-border journey and the cross-border market. We've seen increasing number of marketplaces pop up, niche marketplaces, everything marketplaces, Amazon, eBay. And while marketplaces are a great way to start the cross-border journey, they are also, again, just a jumping off platform. So they take a lot of the compliance burdens off of the sellers. And so we've seen a huge uptick from our customer base of companies selling on marketplaces. Roughly 49% of companies that sell on marketplaces have facilitated cross-border sales through that marketplace. So it is a great way to jump off and get your feet wet with cross-border. And we've seen a huge trend of companies that are migrating that way because it is a easy way to manage the compliance aspect. But there are ways around managing compliance and automation tools that we are going to talk through of ways to capitalize on that opportunity and enter that market without going through a specific marketplace. So let's talk about cracking the code for a smooth cross-border experience and what you need to do to really harness and capitalize on this increasingly large growth market of cross-border e-commerce. Cross-border e-commerce can be broken down into 4 main pillars. One is localization. So as you're selling internationally, you want to be able to speak to those clients that you're selling to, whether that involves localizing the language, localizing the pricing. Those are different tactics that companies do take on. And what we're seeing is a lot of e-commerce platforms are doing that on your behalf. So technology is improving. Companies like Shopify, for example, are doing a lot of this localization tactics on companies' behalf through their website. As simple add-on tools like Shopify Markets, or in BigCommerce, there's other ways to localize that experience so that you're servicing up your goods in a way that those local markets can purchase. 2 is compliance. This is, as we've seen throughout the presentation, is the hardest piece to crack. And this is really where Avalara specializes. So compliance is regulatory, duty and tax calculations, managing those HS and classifying your products, those HS codes. It is managing restrictions, de minimis thresholds, all of those nuances that Nicole and I have presented to you fit into that compliance bucket. 3rd is payments. You need to be able to accept payments in that local currency, as well as accept the local form of payments. Visa and MasterCard, obviously widely accepted, but there are specific nuanced payments for APAC, Alipay, or selling into Europe. They have specific payment providers or use cases or different ways to really make it an easy buying experience for those local customers. And last is shipping. So really ensuring that you can deliver on a specific timeline to that market. So, Amazon has done a great job at standardizing 2-day shipping. As we know, cross-border e-commerce makes it a little more difficult to deliver on that, but really having a good shipping strategy is key to winning in the cross-border space. So there's different carriers to specialize in different lanes, and there's ways to maximize by choosing specific carriers to specific lanes and really allowing yourself a good cross-border experience by picking the carrier that's specific to that lane. So there's ways to really ensure you're tackling this cross-border experience of the localization, compliance, payments, and shipping all in a what we call a DDP experience. So this is the way the market is moving towards. It is a preferred route for e-commerce brands, because really what you are as an e-commerce company is you're a customer experience, right? Delivering that parcel and creating a way to create repeat purchases to your site. So Avalara is really paving the way to solve a lot of the headaches and challenges that are associated to cross-border e-commerce, and ensuring that you are able to facilitate that good experience. So abandoned carts, by not presenting duty and taxes in checkout, lead to a high abandoned cart rate. Products getting stuck in customs, HS classification, the documentation that accompanies the package are key to ensuring your products do not get held up and making sure you deliver your products on time to those customers and meet their expectations. And last is that bad buyer experience. So the DDP, delivered duty paid experience, where you're presenting the fully landed cost or duty and taxes up front, is key to success in ensuring a good experience. Avalara, we connect all pieces of that global compliance puzzle, from the state and local taxes, duty and tax calculations, whether it be sales and use or VAT or other indirect taxes. Avalara has a engine that can solve all those pieces with one single API call. We have solutions to help classify your products to harmonization codes. I'll get into more details on that. We manage filing, so actually filing the tax returns and the compliance related documentation. And we do registration. So as you're looking to expand internationally, you'll have to register in different jurisdictions. So really, if you think about it, we are solving all of those compliance related challenges under one roof through one partner. As we've mentioned throughout this presentation, one of those biggest challenges is HS codes. So Nicole talked about the nuance and changes between the different countries. I talked about how it can get even more granular as you want to sell into one particular country. And Avalara has a solution where we can automatically ingest your product catalog and spit out a HS code, country specific, so that you do not need to worry about classifying your goods. We have an automation solution that can do that for you. There's a variety of different classification solutions out there on the market. And really, it depends on how you're looking to capitalize on that international growth strategy. So there are solutions that focus specifically on speed. Maybe you're a marketplace and have a massive catalog of millions and millions of products, or maybe you sell 2 products exclusively, but sell a lot of them. We have solutions that really focus on what you need for your particular business model, whether it be I have a desire for 2 classifications where I'm selling B2B and I'm selling millions of dollars worth of those goods, and I need documentation to back up my classification. Or maybe you're just speed to market and you have so many products in your catalog and you want to ensure, a truly automated solution. Avalara has a variety of different offerings to cater to those specific needs. Cross-border is a very unique compliance challenge. So once you have your classification, you want to be able to ensure that you're able to calculate those duties and taxes. Because again, that classification is going to drive the actual calculation of duties, as we've showed in previous slides. I'm going to run you through how our cross-border engine works with classification and really the implication of calculating duties and taxes real time. So as an e-commerce merchant, you have your storefront, and that storefront is built on a platform, whether it be Adobe, Shopify, Salesforce, or maybe you homegrown and built your own. That platform integrates directly via a API to Avalara. And the beautiful thing about Avalara is you can pick and choose what pieces of Avalara make the most sense, whether you leverage our classification solution or not. We leverage only our calculation engine, our restrictions engine. It's very modular. So I'm going to walk you through a typical journey of how we calculate duties and taxes real time in a checkout experience. So as a merchant goes through and is browsing for their items, they're going to add those items to their cart. Real time, as they're adding items to the cart, Avalara has all the nuanced rules, free trade agreements, all of the fun content behind the scenes of how that product is taxed in that specific jurisdiction. So as they're going through adding items to the cart, they put in their ship to address. Real time, we are calculating those duties and taxes, presenting them back into that checkout experience. To facilitate that good cross-border experience, you're going to want to capture those, what we call a landed cost, real time in the checkout. So as I walk through this journey, you'll see that once those items are added to the cart, maybe you have a ton of items and you haven't pre-classified any of those items. We can still calculate duties and taxes with or without that classification. We will present that back and display it as I'm showing you here, real time in that checkout experience, duties and taxes. You would collect that from your customer, and that would really facilitate that DDP or that really good customer experience where the customer does not get hit with a surprise bill at the door. Avalara, again, has been around since 2004. We have been in the cross-border space, really paving the way on automation solutions. So we specialize in extremely fast, frictionless, and flexible experience for our customers. We have short go lives to help you get up and running and tackling this cross-border environment quickly. And we do work in that open modular experience where you can pick and choose what pieces of our puzzle that you want to put together that make the most sense for your business. And it is extremely flexible. So please give us a call. Let us know if we can help in any way. We have a lot of pre-built integrations, e-commerce integrations into all of the leading platforms. I believe last time I checked, we have over 1,200 different pre-built integrations. And if you have a homegrown solution, we have a robust API that you can plug into to easily integrate as well. So as we plug into all these different e-commerce platforms, it can help you truly unlock the opportunity that awaits, that $1 trillion opportunity that is sitting out there waiting for merchants to take advantage of. Marketplaces are starting to really pave the way, but there's ways for you to leverage automation tools and take advantage of those key trends that we talked about today to tackle that $1 trillion opportunity. Enhancing the customer experience is one way to really, get your feet wet and get into the cross-border experience simply by enabling a DDP experience. Leveraging tools to help you calculate those state and local and international duties and taxes for whatever country and presenting those real time in checkout. Avoiding additional costs in your supply chain, ensuring customers have that good experience of knowing what that true landed cost is real time in checkout, and truly understanding how you can really maximize your revenue as you sell internationally by understanding the rules and regulations or leveraging a solution to automate those rules and regulations so that you can just focus on what you do best, which is selling your products and growing your business. So create the cross-border solution that is right for you. Leverage Avalara. We have some great modular tools that you can pick and choose what's right for your business. I want to thank the team for putting together this webinar and some great key trends. I advise all of you to read the Reuters report. There is a lot of great content in there that we did not cover today in this webinar, and some great key messages that you should pick up inside that report. And again, thank you very much for the time and the opportunity to speak to you today. I think we'll go ahead and jump into some questions. Nicole and I will take some questions live here. Nicole, looks like we got one question from the audience on HS codes. And the question is, can I use the same HS code that I received from my supplier to sell internationally? That's a good question. And we get that question a lot from typically US merchants who import goods and then they want to sell cross-border, leveraging that same classification code, thinking that they can leverage that. And the answer to that question is no, you can't. HS codes are country specific, so it depends on where you're selling into. If you think back to that Canada example that I laid out of the loafer, depending on how it's classified, but it is nuanced based upon the countries that you want to sell into. So leveraging those import codes that you got from your supplier will not be sufficient to sell to cross-border customers. It looks like we have another question here. I sell currently on marketplaces. Do they take all of the compliance regulation off of my plate? Do I have to worry about any additional compliance regulations when selling through marketplaces? That's a great question. So the answer is, unfortunately, it depends. The marketplace, depending on which one you're leveraging, may take on some of those compliance obligations for you. Laws are changing, and there could be specific nuanced regulation that applies specifically to you as a seller on a marketplace, whether it requires a registration for tax or whether it requires you to facilitate the cross-border calculation as well and build that into your product price. So there is a lot of nuanced tools, and I suggest you talk to us and we can walk through that specific situation with you and understand the nuances, or reach out to your marketplace to further understand what they do on your behalf. And it looks like we have one more question that we have time for. The question is, I'm selling into the EU and I've gotten my products stuck in customs quite frequently lately. I'm curious why. Well, that's a really open-ended question. It could be a number of different factors, but the biggest one that I could foresee is the EU recently changed their legislation to require HS codes on all packages entering the EU. So this is a nuanced change, and even if your package is under de minimis, it still requires an HS code, and it requires it to be a 10-digit HS code, 8 to 10 digits depending on the country. So I highly recommend that you look at your shipping process and your shipping documentation and ensure that you're classifying your goods correctly and have that on your documentation to accompany your package and pass through your carrier network. Well, that looks like all we have time for today. I want to thank you so much for joining the webinar, listening to the key updates and key trends on cross-border e-commerce. Thanks again to the Reuters team. Nicole, appreciate you as always. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Perfect, Evan. It was great doing this webinar with you today. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Hope you have a lovely day.